Part 1. The call of the forest. James had always been someone who sought peace in the simplest things. Living on the outskirts of a quiet town, he often found solace in the solitude of nature. The towering trees, the stillness of the forest, the gentle hum of the earth beneath his feet, all seemed to calm his mind after the bustle of everyday life. But tonight, as he stepped out of his cabin and into the cool evening air, he felt something different. The forest was calling to him, inviting him deeper than usual. The sky above was vast and clear, dotted with stars that twinkled like scattered diamonds. A crescent moon hung high, casting a silvery glow on the land. James pulled his jacket tighter around himself, the cool breeze rustling the leaves of the trees, whispering in a language he could almost understand. Something about this night felt special, as though the forest itself was alive with energy. Tonight, James murmured to himself, the forest has something to show me. He had spent many evenings walking through these woods, but tonight felt different. There was a sense of mystery, a deep pull within him that urged him to wander further than he had ever gone before. The path, less traveled. James wandered along a familiar trail that led to the heart of the forest. The path was narrow, with overgrown vines and moss-covered stones. The air was fresh, filled with the scent of pine and damp earth. As he moved deeper into the woods, the sounds of the town faded away, replaced by the symphony of nature. The wind whispered through the trees. The distant call of an owl echoed through the air, and the occasional rustle of small animals moving in the underbrush could be heard. The deeper he ventured, the quieter it became. The usual sounds of nature seemed to be muted, as though the forest itself was holding its breath. He paused for a moment, sensing the stillness around him. There was no sense of danger, but something in the air felt heavy, as if the trees themselves were watching him. He glanced around and noticed a narrow path veering off to his left, one he had never seen before. It was barely visible, hidden beneath a canopy of branches. The path beckoned, drawing him in. James hesitated for a moment, considering whether he should continue down the well-known trail or explore this new, uncharted route. His curiosity got the best of him. With a determined step, he turned down the narrow path. As he walked, the trees grew thicker, their branches intertwining above him, blocking out the moonlight and casting long shadows on the forest floor. The air felt cooler here, and the sounds of the forest seemed to grow even quieter, as if the path itself was a place apart from the rest of the world. A mysterious clearing after walking for what felt like hours. James finally emerged into a small clearing. The moonlight broke through the canopy above, bathing the area in a soft, ethereal glow. The clearing was unlike any James had seen before. At the center of the space stood a large, ancient oak tree, its twisted roots sprawling across the ground like the hands of a sleeping giant. Its branches reached toward the sky, thick and strong, as though the tree itself was a sentinel watching over the forest. The clearing was eerily quiet, the air thick with a sense of expectation. James felt as though he had stumbled upon something sacred, something hidden from the world. The tree seemed to hold a presence all its own, as if it had witnessed centuries pass and had stories to tell as he approached the tree. James noticed something strange at the base of the trunk. Nestled between the gnarled roots was a small stone circle, weathered by time. The stones were arranged in a perfect ring, as if they had been placed there with care. It was a simple structure, but it felt important, as if it had a purpose. The whispering winds suddenly. A soft breeze swept through the clearing, rustling the leaves of the tree. James turned his head toward the sound, And to his surprise, the wind seemed to be carrying words. They were faint at first, just whispers in the air, but they gradually grew clearer, as though the forest itself was speaking to him. James... The wind whispered, the voice soft and melodic, like a lullaby. You have come... for a reason. James froze, his heart pounding in his chest. Was he hearing things? Had the wind really spoken? He glanced around, searching the trees for any sign of movement, but everything was still. The whispers continued, this time more clearly. Come closer, James. The time has come for you to learn what you seek. The heart of the forest without thinking. James stepped forward, his feet moving on their own accord, as if drawn by some unseen force. He knelt at the stone circle, feeling a sense of reverence as he placed his hands on the smooth stones. The moment his fingers made contact, a surge of energy shot through him, and the world around him seemed to shift. The clearing dissolved, and suddenly he found himself standing in the middle of an ancient forest. Unlike anything he had ever seen before, the trees here were taller, their trunks twisted in unnatural shapes. The air was thick with magic, and the ground beneath his feet seemed to hum with energy. In the distance, James could see a glowing light beckoning him forward. He felt no fear, only a deep sense of purpose, as though this was where he was meant to be. The guardians of the Grovars. James moved toward the light. He noticed figures standing among the trees. They were tall and elegant, their faces obscured by hoods and cloaks made of leaves and vines. They did not speak, but their eyes followed him as he walked, their presence both comforting and unsettling. One of the figures stepped forward, her face soft and serene. You were not the first to seek the heart of the forest, she said, her voice like the rustling of leaves, but you may be the one to truly understand it. The figure gestured toward the glowing light ahead. The heart of the forest is where all things begin, where the balance between light and dark, life and death, is maintained. But that balance is fragile. It is up to you, James, to protect it. Part 2. The Heart of the Grove. The path to understanding. James stood still for a moment, trying to absorb everything that had just happened. The stone circle had transported him to this otherworldly forest, where time seemed to stand still, and the air was thick with magic. The forest before him felt ancient, as if it had existed long before the world he knew. The figure who had appeared from among the trees, her face soft and serene, gestured for him to follow. James did not hesitate. Something within him told him that this was where he was meant to be, where he would finally find the peace he had been seeking. The figure led him deeper into the grove, and with each step, James could feel himself becoming more attuned to the forest. The whisper of the wind in the trees seemed to speak to him, not in words, but in feelings, warmth, comfort, and a deep sense of belonging. As they walked, the trees around them grew even taller, their branches intertwining above, creating a canopy that blocked out the light of the moon. But it wasn't dark here. Instead, the air glowed with a soft, ethereal light, as if the very fabric of the forest itself was alive with energy. The forest's secrets after, walking for what seemed like an eternity. They arrived at a clearing. This was no ordinary clearing. In the center stood an enormous tree, its trunk so wide that it could easily take several people to encircle it. The tree's bark shimmered in the soft light, and its roots stretched deep into the earth, disappearing into the ground like a labyrinth of secrets. James felt a deep sense of reverence as he approached the tree. It was as though the tree had been waiting for him, its energy resonating with his own. The figure stepped forward and placed her hand gently on the bark. "This is the heart of the grove," she said softly, her voice carrying a quiet power. "This tree is the source of the forest's magic, its life force. It has witnessed the beginning of time and will witness its end. It holds the balance between light and dark, life and death." James approached the tree and placed his hand on its bark. The moment he did, a surge of warmth flooded through him. It was as if the tree was speaking directly to him, its energy flowing into him. He could feel the heartbeat of the forest, the pulse of life itself, beating in rhythm with his own. The message of the grove. The figure smiled, watching him closely. "You have been chosen, James. The forest has called to you because you seek something deeper than yourself. You seek understanding. You seek peace." James looked up at her, his heart full of questions. "What do you mean? What does the forest want from me?" "The forest does not want anything from you," she said gently. "It only wants you to understand the balance that exists within it. The light and the dark are intertwined here, not as enemies, but as equals. The forest has a delicate balance that must be preserved, and it has called upon you because it believes you can help restore that balance." James felt a stirring in his chest, as if the weight of the world had been placed upon him. But at the same time, there was a sense of peace. The forest was not asking him to fix it. It was asking him to understand it, to listen. "I don't know how I can help," James said softly. "I'm just a man, a simple person. I'm not someone who can restore balance to the world." The figure's eyes sparkled with a knowing light. "You've already begun, James. The first step is to understand that you are not separate from the world. You are a part of it. You are the forest, the wind, the trees. And when you understand that, the balance will be restored. You must trust in yourself and in the world around you." A gift from the Grovas. James stood there, contemplating her words. The tree before him began to glow. The roots seemed to pulse, and a soft light radiated from the center of the trunk. A small branch, almost like a vine, reached out and brushed against his hand, offering him something. James reached out, his heart racing with curiosity. The vine dropped a small, glowing seed into his palm. The seed was warm to the touch, its light faint but steady, pulsing with energy. "This is a gift from the heart of the grove," the figure said. "This seed contains the magic of the forest. It represents the balance between light and dark. You must keep it safe, for it will guide you on your journey. When you are ready, you will know how to use its power." James gazed at the seed, feeling its warmth and power. It was a symbol of everything he had learned in the forest: the balance, the understanding, the connection between all things. He didn't know what the seed would do, but somehow he knew it was important. The path ahead, the figure nodded, sensing his thoughts. "You must now leave the grove, James. The world beyond the forest awaits you. But remember, the balance you have learned here is not just for the forest. It is for you, too. You carry it within you, and it will guide you in the world you return to." James looked around the clearing, his heart full of gratitude. The forest had given him something precious: understanding, and with it, a new sense of purpose. He stepped back from the tree, holding the seed gently in his palm. The figure smiled once more before fading into the shadows of the forest. "Go in peace, James," she said softly. "The forest will always be with you." The return home. As James left the grove, he felt lighter than he had in years. The burden he had carried, his restlessness, his doubts, had been replaced with clarity. The world outside the forest no longer seemed as overwhelming. He could hear the rustling of the leaves in the trees, the soft call of the birds, and the gentle hum of the earth. It was as though the entire world was speaking to him, reminding him of the balance he had learned. When he returned to the edge of the forest, the sky had already begun to darken. The first stars of the evening twinkled above, and the moonlight bathed the world in a soft glow. The forest had given him a gift, but it had also given him something far more valuable: peace. James knew that. No matter what challenges lay ahead, he could always return to the forest, to the heart of the grove, and find solace in the balance of the world. Part 3: The Awakening of the World, the Return to Realities. James stepped away from the forest. The transition between the tranquility of the grove and the busy world outside felt almost jarring. The soft whispers of the forest faded into the background, replaced by the familiar sounds of the town in the distance. The rustling leaves and the comforting hum of nature seemed so far away now. He had learned so much in the heart of the grove. But now, as he walked back toward his home, he couldn't help but feel the weight of the world pressing on him once again. The challenges he had faced seemed simpler in the forest, but here, in the waking world, it was as if the struggles had returned, relentless and demanding. The sun was setting as James approached his cabin, the sky painted in shades of pink and gold. He felt a sense of unease, a lingering uncertainty about how to integrate the peace he had found in the forest into his everyday life. The calm rhythm of the trees, the steady heartbeat of the land. How could he carry that peace back into the noise of the world? The struggle between peace and chaos the next few days passed in a blur. James tried to return to his routine, but everything seemed harder than it had before. The work he once found fulfilling now felt draining. The noise of the world, the constant hum of vehicles, the clamor of conversations seemed so much louder than he remembered. It was as if he had lost his connection to the forest, to the balance he had found there. Every time he felt overwhelmed, James would reach into his pocket, where he kept the seed the heart of the grove had given him. He didn't know why he kept it with him. Perhaps it was a reminder of the peace he had found, or perhaps it was something more. It pulsed faintly in his hand, a soft, steady rhythm that grounded him when the world felt chaotic. But as the days went on, the sense of unease began to build. James found himself longing for the quiet of the forest, the soft whisper of the wind in the trees, the gentle glow of the moonlight filtering through the leaves. The world outside seemed too loud, too harsh. He couldn't help but wonder if he had truly left the forest behind. A glimpse of hope one evening. As James sat on his porch, looking out over the quiet landscape, he noticed something unusual. The air had changed. The wind had shifted, carrying with it the scent of pine and fresh earth reminders of the grove. He looked around, half expecting to see the trees from the forest, but there was nothing. And yet he could feel the presence of something familiar, something calming. He stood up and walked into the woods behind his cabin. The trees here weren't as ancient as those in the heart of the grove, but they still held a quiet strength. As he walked deeper into the forest, the familiar rustling of the leaves welcomed him back. The noise of the outside world seemed to melt away, and the peace of the forest began to wrap around him once again. James closed his eyes, taking a deep breath. The scent of the trees, the sound of the wind, the feeling of the earth beneath his feet, it all came rushing back, and for the first time since his return, he felt truly at peace. The balance he had found in the heart of the grove wasn't something that could be left behind. It was something he carried with him, within himself. The forest, the balance, the peace, it was always there, within him, waiting for him to reconnect. The call to action as James continued walking deeper into the forest, he found himself drawn to a familiar place, small clearing he had passed many times before. It wasn't the same clearing where he had found the heart of the grove, but it was a peaceful spot nonetheless, with soft grass beneath his feet and the trees forming a protective canopy above. He sat down in the grass, letting the quiet settle over him. The light from the setting sun filtered through the trees, casting long shadows on the ground. James closed his eyes, focusing on his breath, grounding himself in the present moment. As he sat there, a feeling began to stir within him, deep sense of purpose. The journey he had taken through the forest had taught him many things. It had shown him the importance of balance, the need to embrace both light and dark. But it had also shown him something else, that the peace he had found was not something he could keep to himself. It was something to share, something to offer to the world. The world around him was filled with chaos, with people lost in their struggles, consumed by the demands of life. But the balance, the peace he had learned, could help them. He could help them. A new path. James stood up, the weight of his decision settling on his shoulders. He knew what he had to do. The peace of the forest, the balance he had found, could help others who felt lost, who needed a way to find peace in the midst of the chaos. He could feel the connection to the forest deep within him, its presence guiding him forward. He wasn't sure what the future would hold, but he knew one thing for certain. He had to share the lessons of the grove with the world. The peace he had found wasn't just for him, it was for everyone. With a renewed sense of purpose, James turned toward the town, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. He knew the path would not be easy, but he was no longer afraid. The balance between light and dark, peace and chaos, it was within him now, and it would guide him as he helped others find the same peace he had discovered. Part 4. The sharing of peace. A new purpose. James had always known that his life in the town was full of noise and distraction, but it wasn't until his journey through the forest that he truly understood the weight of that chaos. The balance he had found in the heart of the grove had changed him, and he now felt a deep urge to share what he had learned, to help others find peace in the midst of the whirlwind that life often felt like. The days following his return had been filled with moments of reflection. James would often walk through the forest behind his cabin, the same path that had brought him peace, allowing the whispers of the trees and the sound of the wind to settle his mind. Yet there was still a nagging feeling that he couldn't quite shake. He couldn't keep this peace to himself. The world outside needed this balance. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the stars began to appear, James made a decision. He would start small. He would share his experiences with the people in the town, beginning with those closest to him. He would show them that there was more to life than rushing through it, that there was peace to be found in the simplest of moments, and it could be found by reconnecting with the world around them. The first step. The next day, James reached out to his closest friends, Maya, a local artist, and Thomas, the town's librarian. Both were people he trusted, people who understood the importance of balance in their own ways. They had always been open-minded, and he knew they would listen. They met at a small cafe in town, a quiet spot that offered refuge from the bustle of daily life. As they sat down with their coffee, James hesitated for a moment. He wasn't sure how to begin, but he knew the time had come to speak his truth. Maya, Thomas, James started, his voice calm but earnest. I've been on a journey, a real one. I've learned something that's changed the way I see the world, and I feel like I need to share it. It's about balance, light and shadow. It's about finding peace in the chaos." Maya leaned forward, her eyes curious. "What do you mean, James? Are you talking about meditation or some kind of spiritual thing?" James shook his head. "It's not just meditation, though that helps. It's about understanding that life isn't just about the good or the bad. It's about finding harmony between them. In the forest, I learned that the shadow isn't something to fear. It's just as important as the light. Without one, the other doesn't exist." Thomas, who had been quiet, nodded slowly. "That sounds like something you learn from nature. But how does it work in real life? How can we find balance in our everyday lives?" James smiled, relieved that they were willing to listen. "That's the thing. It's all about perspective. We have to understand that both light and dark are part of who we are, part of what makes the world work. And once we accept that, we can find peace in everything, even in the chaos." A new beginning. The conversation continued, and as James shared more of what he had learned, something began to shift. Maya and Thomas both seemed to understand. They began to see the world differently, not as a place to fight against, but as a place to accept, with all its imperfections. Over the next few days, James began to share his experience with others in the town. He started a small group, inviting anyone who wanted to learn how to find peace in the midst of their busy lives. They met in the park, under the shade of the trees, and slowly more people came, drawn by the calm presence James now exuded. Each session began with a simple walk through the forest, allowing the participants to connect with nature. They listened to the sounds of the wind, the rustle of the leaves, and the birds singing high in the trees. Then they would gather in a circle to talk, to reflect on their experiences and share their thoughts. James found that the more he shared, the more the town began to change. People who had been consumed by the stress of work, family, and daily struggles began to find moments of peace. They started to recognize the importance of balance, not just in their environment, but within themselves. The ripple effect. As weeks passed, the town began to shift. The air seemed lighter, the people more relaxed. James's group grew, and those who had attended began sharing what they had learned with others. Soon, the entire community was embracing the idea of balance between light and shadow, between the chaos of daily life and the peace that could be found within. The local cafe became a place where people gathered, not just to talk, but to listen. Conversations about the balance of nature, of light and dark, became commonplace. The town felt more connected, and James knew that this change was just the beginning. It wasn't just about the forest anymore. It was about creating a space where everyone could feel at peace. James had started small, but the ripple effect was undeniable. The peace he had found in the forest was now spreading, transforming his community. People who had once felt disconnected from nature were now reconnecting, finding solace in the world around them. A journey shared one evening as James walked through the woods after another successful group session. He reflected on how far he had come. The peaceful energy of the grove was still with him, guiding him as he moved through the world. He had found his purpose, not just to seek peace, but to share it with others. The stars above seemed to shine brighter than ever as James made his way back home. He knew the journey was not over. There would always be challenges, always be moments of uncertainty. But now he felt equipped to face them with the peace of the forest within him. And as the wind whispered through the trees, James knew that the forest would always be there waiting for him, waiting for all of them whenever they needed to reconnect, to find peace, and to restore balance. Part 5. The ripple of change. A growing community. As the days passed, James felt a sense of fulfillment he had never experienced before. The peace he had found in the forest had not only transformed him, but it was now spreading to those around him. His small group continued to grow, with people from all walks of life coming to learn the art of balance. There was something unique about these gatherings. Each person who came to join felt drawn to the forest's peaceful energy. And with James's guidance, they began to connect with the rhythm of nature in a way that was both simple and profound. The noise of their everyday lives, once overwhelming, now felt distant, replaced by the tranquility of the woods. James watched as his friends, Maya, Thomas, and others, began to blossom. They had started by listening, but now they were teaching others, too. The town was changing, slowly but surely. People were taking time to walk in the woods, to sit by the river, to listen to the whispers of the trees. They began to slow down, to feel the peace that had once eluded them. But even in this growing sense of peace, James knew that there was more to be done. The balance he had restored in his own heart was still fragile. And while the community was flourishing, he knew that it wasn't permanent. There would always be forces that threatened to disrupt the balance, the stress of everyday life, the constant demands of work, the noise of modern society, the call of the outside world. One afternoon, as James sat in the cafe with Maya and Thomas, a letter from a nearby town. The letter was an invitation to speak at a gathering on wellness and nature. It was an opportunity to share his experiences and the lessons of the forest with a larger audience. Maya and Thomas both looked at him, their expressions filled with curiosity. "You should do it," Maya said, her voice full of encouragement. "The work you're doing here is making a real difference. This could be a chance to reach even more people." James felt a wave of uncertainty wash over him. He had always felt comfortable in the quiet of his small town, but now, with the world calling him to share his message on a larger scale, he wasn't sure if he was ready. The peace he had found in the forest had been personal, and though it was growing in the town, the thought of taking it beyond made him feel exposed, vulnerable. "I don't know," James said, his voice trailing off. "I'm not sure I can do this on a larger scale. What if I fail?" Thomas placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You've already started this journey, James. You can't keep the peace you've found to yourself. The world needs it now more than ever. Maybe this is the next step." The crossroads of choice that evening, James sat alone in the forest, the cool air brushing against his skin. The trees around him whispered their soothing lullaby, and the distant call of the owl echoed in the stillness. The forest was always a place of peace for him, a place where he could think clearly. But tonight, the whispers felt different. They were more urgent, as if the forest was telling him to listen closely. The moonlight filtered through the canopy, casting soft beams on the forest floor. James closed his eyes and allowed the forest's rhythm to guide him. The choice before him was clear: stay within the comfort of the town, or step into the unknown and take his message to a larger world. It was a decision that felt monumental, one that would change everything. "I've already learned so much," James whispered to the trees. "But is it enough? Am I ready to share this with the world?" The wind picked up slightly, swirling around him. It felt like the forest was urging him to step forward, to trust in himself, in the lessons he had learned. The peace he had found wasn't just for him, was for the world. As James opened his eyes, he knew what he had to do. It was time to take the next step. The message of the forest, the balance between light and shadow, needed to be shared. The world needed to hear it, and he was the one to share it. The journey ahead, the next few days, were filled with preparation. James packed his bags, his heart heavy with both excitement and uncertainty. He had never traveled far from his small town, but the opportunity to share his message was something he couldn't ignore. He knew that his journey had always been about more than just finding peace. It was about spreading that peace to others. As he left the town behind, James looked out at the landscape, taking in the familiar sights of the forest and the mountains. He was leaving the place that had been his sanctuary, but he carried the lessons of the heart of the grove with him. No matter where he went, the balance between light and dark would remain with him. He would be the bridge between the peace of the forest and the chaos of the world. The road ahead was uncertain, but James knew that he was ready. He had learned to embrace the shadow and the light, and now he would share that wisdom with the world. The balance he had found within himself was something that everyone could access, and it was time to bring it to those who needed it most. A new dawn as James journeyed toward the nearby town to speak. The sun began to rise, casting its first rays across the landscape. The sky was painted in hues of gold and pink, and the birds began to sing their morning song. It felt like a new beginning, a fresh start. James smiled softly as he walked, the peace he had found in the forest now fully integrated into his heart. No matter what challenges lay ahead, he knew that he was ready to face them. The journey of balance had only just begun, and the world was waiting. Part 6. The Path to Awakening, a New Beginning. James had never imagined that his quiet life in the small town would lead him to something as monumental as this. Yet, here he was, standing in front of a crowd in a neighboring town, preparing to speak about the peace and balance he had discovered in the forest. The air was thick with anticipation, and the room was filled with people eager to hear his message. He had traveled far to be here, leaving the safety of his home and the familiar whispers of the forest behind. The further he moved away from the grove, the more he realized how much the world outside had changed since his journey began. The challenges of daily life still loomed large in the minds of those around him. But now he had something to offer, a way to face those challenges with. A sense of peace. As the room grew quieter, James stepped up to the podium. The nervousness that had once gripped him began to dissipate, replaced by a quiet confidence. He was no longer just a man seeking peace for himself. He was now a bridge between the wisdom of the forest and the chaos of the world. The first words, "Thank you for welcoming me here," James began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I've come to share something simple, yet profound, a message I believe can change the way we live, the way we see the world." The audience remained quiet, hanging on his every word. Most of us go through life in a constant rush. We wake up, we work, we hurry through the day, and we go to bed exhausted. We are consumed by the noise of the world, the demands of work, the responsibilities, the expectations. We rarely stop to listen, to pause, to breathe. But there's something I learned that changed everything for me. The importance of balance. He paused, allowing his words to sink in. The room was silent, and James felt a wave of connection with the audience. This was why he had come to share this moment of understanding. Balance is not just about finding peace in quiet moments. It's about understanding that light and dark are both part of our world. We must learn to live with both. The shadow is not our enemy, it's part of who we are. And when we accept that, we can begin to find peace. The call to action. James felt the weight of the crowd's attention. There was an almost palpable silence in the room, and he could sense the curiosity in the air. He wasn't sure if they fully understood what he was saying, but he knew he had to say it. I know it's not easy. The world is loud and it's full of distractions. But the key is to find moments, however small, to reconnect with the world around us. To listen to the wind in the trees, the rustle of the leaves, the birds singing in the distance. These are the reminders that peace is always within reach. He looked out at the audience, meeting their eyes one by one. You don't have to leave your everyday life behind to find peace. You just have to listen to be present. The forest, the grove, it's not some faraway place. It's within you. It's within all of us. James took a deep breath. I ask you all to take a moment each day, to stop, to breathe, to listen. When we find balance within ourselves, we can find balance in the world. The first response. James finished speaking. The room remained quiet for a long moment. He couldn't tell if the message had landed, but then one person stood up. It was an older man, with deep lines on his face and a look of understanding in his eyes. Thank you, the man said simply, his voice quiet but firm. I've spent my whole life rushing, trying to make things happen. I didn't realize how much I'd lost by not just listening. The rest of the room was still, but soon others began to speak up. One by one, people shared their experiences, their struggles with finding peace, their need for balance in their lives. James felt a sense of validation, knowing that his message was resonating with others. The evening continued with more conversations, more people asking questions, sharing their thoughts. It wasn't a grand transformation, but it was a beginning. And that was enough. The ripple effect over the next few weeks. James traveled to neighboring towns, sharing his message of balance, light and dark. The more he spoke, the more he realized that this journey was bigger than he had ever imagined. It wasn't just about him anymore, it was about a community, a world that needed this message of peace. And as the people he spoke to began to understand the importance of balance, they began to spread the word. The message rippled out, quietly but steadily, touching the hearts of those who needed it most. The inner peace. But even as the message spread, James never forgot the lessons he had learned in the heart of the grove. He still took time each day to walk in the forest, to reconnect with the earth, to listen to the whispers of the trees. The peace he had found in the grove was not something that could be lost. It was a part of him now, something he carried within him, no matter where he went. A moment of reflection one evening, as James sat by the river, watching the water flow gently past, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The journey had been long, and it wasn't over. There would always be more to learn, more challenges to face. But for the first time in a long while, James felt content. He had found his place in the world, not just as a man seeking peace, but as a messenger, a guide for others who were searching for the same balance. He closed his eyes and let the sound of the river wash over him, letting the calm rhythm soothe his mind. The world, with all its noise and chaos, was still there, but he had learned how to live in it without losing himself. The balance was not a destination, it was a way of life. As the sun began to set, casting a golden light over the water, James smiled softly. He had found peace, and he would continue to share it, one step at a time. Part 7. The Storm Before the Calm. the challenge of disruption, James had found peace, or so he thought. As his message of balance and harmony spread to more towns, more people, he began to realize something he had overlooked. Peace was not as simple as it seemed. The chaos of the outside world was not easily silenced, and there were always forces at play that threatened to disrupt the delicate harmony he had worked so hard to create. The more he traveled and shared his teachings, the more he encountered resistance. Some people were eager to embrace the message, finding comfort and solace in the quiet wisdom of the forest. But others, those caught up in the relentless pace of modern life, found it difficult, if not impossible, to slow down, to listen, and to embrace the balance between light and dark. James had always known that life wasn't perfect, but as he faced this new challenge, he began to understand just how fragile peace could be. One evening, after a particularly difficult meeting in a neighboring town, James returned to his cabin feeling weary. The day had been filled with passionate arguments, questions that seemed to have no answers, and people who were not ready to hear what he had to say. As he sat on his porch, the weight of the world seemed to press down on him. He looked out at the quiet forest, its peaceful rhythm a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside him. He could hear the wind picking up in the trees, a warning sign that something was coming both in nature and in his own heart. The personal struggle. The days following the meeting were filled with a sense of uncertainty. James found himself struggling to find the words to explain what he had learned. The peace he had once shared so effortlessly now felt distant, as if it was slipping through his fingers. It was easy to find balance when the world around him was calm. But now, as he faced resistance and doubt from others, he found himself questioning whether he could truly maintain that balance in the face of chaos. James decided to take a walk in the forest, hoping that the familiar sounds of nature would help him find clarity. As he walked, the wind howled through the trees, the branches creaking under the strain of the storm. It was a reminder that nature, like life, was unpredictable. The balance between light and dark was not something that could be was something that had to be constantly nurtured. The turning point as James ventured deeper into the forest. He arrived at the familiar clearing, the place where he had first connected with the heart of the grove. The ancient oak tree stood tall, its gnarled roots reaching deep into the earth, its branches twisting toward the sky. The tree had always been a symbol of strength and resilience, a reminder that even in the darkest times there was always hope. James stood before the tree, his hands resting on its bark. The storm raged around him, the wind howling, the rain beginning to fall in torrents. Yet the tree remained steadfast, unmoving. In that moment, James realized something important. The storm, the chaos, the doubt, it was all part of the process. Just as the tree had endured countless storms, so too would he. The balance between light and dark was not a static thing. It was ever-changing, always in motion. To find peace was not to escape the storms of life, but to learn how to stand firm. Through them, the forest had shown him that. The heart of the grove had taught him that peace was not a destination, was a journey. The return to the people with this new understanding. James returned to the town, ready to face the challenges ahead. He knew that the road to peace was not an easy one, but he also knew that the more he shared his message, the more people would begin to understand. The town had been through its own struggles, but now, with the knowledge James had shared, it was beginning to heal. People were beginning to listen, to reflect, to take time for themselves. There was still resistance, but now James had a new strength, deeper understanding of the balance between light and shadow, both in the world and within himself. He gathered his community once again, this time not to lecture, but to share his own journey. He spoke honestly about his struggles, about the doubt he had felt, and how he had learned to embrace both the light and the dark within him. The people listened, not just to his words, but to the sincerity in his voice. He wasn't perfect, and he didn't have all the answers, but he was willing to share his experience, and that, James realized, was enough. The journey to peace wasn't about perfection, it was about progress. It was about the willingness to face the storm, to stand firm in the chaos, and to continue moving forward, one step at a time. The calm after the storm. As the weeks passed, the town began to thrive in ways James hadn't imagined. People were embracing the balance, finding moments of peace amidst the hustle and bustle of their daily lives. The resistance was still there, but it was no longer the overwhelming force it had once been. People were starting to understand that peace wasn't something that could be forced. It was something that had to be embraced, a quiet presence that could exist even in the midst of chaos. James continued to lead his group, guiding others to find their own balance. And while he still faced challenges, he no longer felt the weight of the world on his shoulders. He had learned to trust the process, to trust the journey. The storm had passed, but James knew that there would be others. Life would always be a delicate balance, and the forest would always be there to remind him of that truth. In the end, it wasn't about avoiding the storm, it was about learning how to stand strong through it, knowing that peace would always return. Part 8. The echoes of Change's shift in the wind. James had found a rhythm in his life, a gentle flow that allowed him to balance the world outside and the peace within. The people of his town had embraced the message he brought from the forest, learning to slow down and listen to the whispers of nature. Yet, there were still moments when James felt the weight of the world pressing on him, especially as more people began to seek him out, wanting guidance or simply a moment of peace in their busy lives. But as the days passed, James started to feel something shifting. It was subtle at first, a change in the air, a heaviness he couldn't quite explain. He had walked the path of balance for so long that he had begun to think it was something that could be maintained effortlessly. But life, as he was learning, was rarely so simple. The wind had changed, and with it came a series of events that would test the very peace James had worked so hard to create. The destruction. It began with small things, people in the town returning to their old ways, becoming too caught up in the daily grind, the weight of responsibilities overtaking their sense of calm. At first, it didn't concern James. After all, the path to peace was a personal one, and everyone had their own journey to follow. But the changes became more noticeable. People began to argue in the group sessions. The quiet, thoughtful discussions that had once been a hallmark of their gatherings were replaced by impatience and frustration. Even Maya and Thomas, once so committed to the path of balance, began to pull away. The growing demand for James's attention and guidance began to take a toll on him as well. James felt the storm of chaos building on the horizon. Facing the storm one evening, as the town bustled with preparations for a local festival, James took a walk into the woods, seeking the solace he had once found in the heart of the grove. He needed to clear his mind and reconnect with the balance that had been his anchor. The forest, however, felt different this time. The whispers of the trees seemed muffled, and the usual calm presence of the wind was absent. Instead, there was a quiet tension in the air, as though the forest itself was waiting for something to happen. James walked deeper into the woods, his thoughts heavy with doubt. Why is everything falling apart? He wondered aloud, why is it so hard to maintain peace? He paused at the clearing where the ancient oak tree stood, its roots reaching deep into the earth, just as they had when he first encountered it. The tree had always been a source of comfort, but tonight it seemed distant, as if it were holding back its wisdom. James placed his hand on the trunk, and for the first time, he felt a surge of energy, a connection, not just to the tree, but to the earth beneath him, to the forest around him, and to something deeper within himself. "Tell me," he whispered, "how do I bring peace when everything seems to be slipping away?" For a long time, there was no response, but then a soft breeze stirred the leaves, and a quiet voice filled his mind. "You cannot control everything, James. Balance is not a fixed state. It is a dynamic force, always changing, always adapting. You must accept the ebb and flow of life. The challenge is not to fight the storm, but to find your footing in it." A moment of clarity. James closed his eyes, the words reverberating within him. The storm of chaos was inevitable. It was a part of life, just as the calm was. He couldn't stop the world from spinning. He couldn't stop people from becoming caught in the tides of their own struggles. But he could choose how to respond. As the voice faded, the stillness returned, and the forest seemed to exhale. James stood there for what felt like an eternity, feeling the weight of his own doubts lifting. He had been so focused on maintaining peace that he had forgotten the most important lesson. The peace within him wasn't about perfection. It was about acceptance, accepting both the light and the dark, the calm and the storm. He turned and walked back toward the town, a sense of clarity washing over him. He would not try to control the chaos. He would simply find his center within it. The journey was not about eliminating the struggle, was about learning to move with it, to adapt. The return of balance. The next few weeks were challenging, but James faced them with a new perspective. He began to share what he had learned with the town, not as a teacher with all the answers, but as someone who had learned to accept the ebb and flow of life. He spoke of the storm he had felt within himself, and how he had learned to find peace even when everything around him was in turmoil. And slowly, the town began to shift again. The arguments stopped, the frustration eased, and people began to return to their practices of balance, not as a strict rule, but as a way of being. They accepted that life would never be perfect, but they could still find moments of peace. Even amidst the chaos, James realized that the journey was never about achieving a permanent state of peace. It was about the ability to stay grounded, to find balance in the ever-changing world, and to adapt to the rhythm of life. The beginning of a new chapter. As James walked through the town one evening, he felt a sense of calm that he hadn't felt in a long time. The people were smiling, engaged in conversation, and sharing stories. The noise that had once overwhelmed him now felt like a comforting hum, the sound of life in motion. He had found a new sense of purpose, not to lead people toward an idealized version of peace, but to help them find their own balance, their own connection to the world around them. The heart of the grove had taught him that peace was not something to hold on to tightly, but something to experience. And now, James was ready to continue his journey, not as a teacher, but as a fellow traveler, walking with others on the path toward understanding. The storm had passed, but James knew that life would always bring new challenges, and he was ready to face them with the balance of light and dark, peace and chaos, always within him. Part 9. The Path of Transformation. A new beginning. The town had begun to change in ways James hadn't expected. What had started as a small group learning to find peace within themselves had now become a community-wide movement. More and more people were embracing the lessons of the forest, and slowly the culture of the town was shifting. The frantic pace of daily life had softened, and the people, now more attuned to nature's rhythms, were finding peace in the quiet moments that once went unnoticed. Yet, with the growing number of people eager to learn, James found himself facing a new challenge. As much as the forest had taught him about balance, it had also revealed a profound truth. Peace could not be forced, and sometimes peace required letting go, even if it meant facing discomfort along the way. The call for change. James had been invited to speak at a larger gathering in a distant city, a place far removed from the tranquility of his small town. He knew this was another opportunity to share his message, but the idea of leaving the quiet of his home for the bustling city filled him with uncertainty. Could the peace he had found be shared on a broader scale? And more importantly, would it be accepted in a world that seemed so far removed from the quiet wisdom of the forest? The thought of stepping back into the whirlwind of the outside world was overwhelming. The city was fast-paced, full of distractions, noise, and endless demands. Would the calm he had worked so hard to cultivate survive in such an environment? As the day of his departure approached, James wrestled with doubt. Could he really bring peace to a place that seemed so far from the balance he had found in the grove? Could he be the catalyst for change on a larger scale, or would he simply be swept up in the noise of the world? The journey to the city. On the morning of his departure, James packed a small bag and made his way to the train station. The sun had just begun to rise, casting a soft glow over the landscape. As he stood on the platform, the familiar rhythm of the world around him seemed to fade into the background. For a moment, all that remained was the quiet sound of his breath, the gentle breeze, and the sense of calm that he had found in the forest. He boarded the train, leaving behind the town and the forest that had become his sanctuary. The further the train carried him from home, the more distant the peace of the grove seemed. The city awaited him, full of challenges and uncertainty. But James knew that this journey was necessary. The balance he had found was not meant to be kept in isolation. It was a gift meant to be shared. And so, with a deep breath, he closed his eyes and trusted that the lessons of the forest would guide him through whatever awaited. The city's chaos. The city was everything James had expected: fast, noisy, and overwhelming. The streets were filled with people rushing from one place to another, their faces tense, their minds occupied with the tasks ahead. The air was thick with the sound of traffic, voices, and the hum of 1,000 conversations. It was a stark contrast to the stillness of the forest. As James navigated the crowded streets, he could feel the tension in the air. The people here seemed to be caught in a never-ending rush, as though they were constantly striving to reach something that always seemed just out of reach. It was a world of ambition, of competition, and of constant movement. The conference hall where he was scheduled to speak was no different. People hurried around, preparing for the event, their conversations filled with jargon and expectations. James stood at the edge of the crowd, feeling the weight of the chaos press against him. He felt small in this vast sea of people, unsure of how his message would resonate in a world so different from the one he had come to know. A moment of doubt. As the time for his presentation approached, James retreated to a quiet corner of the building. The noise of the conference hall seemed to amplify in his mind, and for a moment he wondered if he was truly ready. Could he really offer something of value to a room full of strangers, many of whom were so entrenched in the hustle and bustle of their lives? He closed his eyes and took a deep breath, remembering the stillness of the forest, the soft rustle of the leaves, and the steady rhythm of the wind. The message of balance was not one of force, it was one of acceptance, of finding peace amidst the chaos. But how could he convey that to people who were so focused on their next task, their next goal, their next deadline? For a brief moment, doubt crept in. Perhaps he had made a mistake. Perhaps the peace he had found was meant to stay. In the grove, in the quiet corners of the world where time slowed and the noise of society couldn't reach. But then he remembered the tree, the ancient oak that had stood in the center of the grove, its roots deep in the earth, its branches reaching toward the sky. It had weathered countless storms, yet it stood firm, always finding its balance. The storm, the chaos, the noise, they were all part of life. And just like the oak, James had to stand firm, to trust in the lessons he had learned. The speech, when the moment finally arrived, James stepped onto the stage. The room fell silent, and all eyes turned toward him. He felt a surge of nervous energy, but instead of trying to fight it, he embraced it. The nerves were simply part of the process, another part of the balance. He began to speak, his voice steady but filled with emotion. He shared his journey, his experience with the forest, and the lessons he had learned about balance. He spoke of the importance of finding peace in a chaotic world, of embracing both the light and the shadow within ourselves. As he spoke, he saw the faces in the crowd begin to soften. The tension that had filled the room seemed to ease, and for a moment the bustling energy of the city faded into the background. People really listened, taking in the words that James had to share. The shift by the end of his speech. The room was still. There was no applause, no standing ovation, only a quiet sense of understanding. James knew that his words had touched something within them, but he also knew that the journey was far from over. The real work would come after this moment when the people left the conference hall and returned to their everyday lives. But as he stepped down from the stage, he felt a deep sense of peace. He had done what he had come to do, and no matter what challenges lay ahead, he knew that the message of balance of light and shadow was something worth sharing. The city, with all its chaos and noise, had not swallowed him. Instead, he had found his place in it, standing firm, like the oak tree, rooted in the balance he had learned to embrace. Part 10. The Circle of Renewal. Change in the wind. The days following his speech in the city had been a whirlwind. James had received letters, messages, and invitations to speak in other places. The words he shared about balance, peace, and the need for harmony between light and dark were resonating with people. The ripple of change was spreading, slowly but steadily. But despite the excitement of his newfound purpose, James began to notice something. The peace he had found in the forest, the tranquility of the grove, seemed to be slipping away. The more he spoke to others, the more demands were placed on him. He had become a symbol of balance, a figure others turned to for guidance. The weight of this role began to feel heavy. He had always thought that peace was something he could share freely, something he could spread like seeds in the wind. But now he realized that the act of sharing peace was not without its challenges. The more people he reached, the more he had to give of himself. And in giving so much, he began to feel a loss of the very peace he had worked so hard to maintain. The struggle within James walked into the forest, hoping the familiar sounds of the wind in the trees and the rustling of leaves would restore the calm he had lost. The forest was always there for him, offering solace, but tonight, even the whisper of the trees felt distant. The weight of the world, of all the people who had come to him for help, pressed heavily on his shoulders. He had shared his journey, his wisdom, but in doing so, he had started to lose touch with his own inner peace. It was as though he had given away so much of himself that there was nothing left to hold on to. As he sat beneath the ancient oak tree, the one that had witnessed his transformation, James closed his eyes and took a deep breath. The wind carried the scent of pine and earth, but instead of comforting him, it only deepened his sense of emptiness. He had taught others to find balance, but had he truly found it for himself? The voice of the forest James sat in silence, his mind filled with doubt, when a soft voice seemed to echo from the trees. It was gentle, yet strong, and it filled him with a sense of recognition. It was the voice he had heard before, in the heart of the grove. "James," the voice whispered, "you have given much, and now you must take the time to receive." James opened his eyes, his heart racing. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "The balance you seek is not just in giving," the voice responded. "It is in the ebb and flow, in the exchange. You have shared your peace, but now you must return to yourself. You cannot pour from an empty cup." James paused, letting the words settle within him. For so long, he had been focused on helping others, on spreading the peace he had found. But in doing so, he had forgotten the most important lesson: to nourish himself. He sat quietly, allowing the forest's wisdom to wash over him. He realized that peace wasn't just about offering comfort to others. It was about maintaining the balance within himself, about giving and receiving in equal measure. To truly help others, he needed to first restore his own sense of peace. The circle of renewal in that moment, James understood. The balance wasn't something that could be maintained by giving alone. It was a circle, a continuous flow of energy between himself and the world. Just as the forest had taught him, the light and dark, the giving and receiving were all part of the same cycle. He had to return to himself in order to continue sharing with others. James stood up and took a deep breath, feeling the connection between his body and the earth beneath him. The forest, the wind, the trees, they were all part of him, and he was part of them. The peace he had found was not something separate from him. It was within him, always. As he made his way back to the town, he knew that his journey wasn't over. The world would always need balance, and he would continue to share that balance with others. But he also knew that he had to nurture himself, peace within himself, before he could help others find it. The return of harmony, the days that followed, James began to practice what he had learned. He still shared his message of peace, but now he made sure to take time for himself, to reconnect with the forest, and to find moments of quiet amidst the chaos. He learned to listen not only to the world around him, but to his own needs, his own heart. The people of the town began to notice the difference in him. He was more present, more at ease. His message of balance had grown deeper, richer, and the people he worked with began to follow his example, learning that they, too, had to nurture themselves in order to nurture others. A new cycle, as the seasons changed and the town continued to thrive, James felt a deep sense of peace within him. The forest, with all its wisdom and magic, had become a part of him, and he had become a part of it. The balance he had sought was not something that could be fixed or static. It was an ongoing journey, a cycle of renewal. The sun began to set. As James walked through the forest, the golden light of dusk casting long shadows across the path. The wind whispered through the trees, and for the first time in a long while, James felt truly at peace. The forest had taught him that peace was not something to be achieved, was something to be lived. And now, as he walked forward into the unknown, he knew that he would continue to live in that balance, embracing both the light and the dark, the giving and the receiving, always in the flow of life.